Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the important articles present in the newspaper and search the nearby areas for relevance in the prelims as well as the mains exam. Today, in total, we are going to have a detailed discussion of around nine different topics. Now, these topics will basically vary from relevance in the mains to the case of the relevance even in the prelims examination. The first topic that you see, that is ordinance increases number of Supreme Court judges to 37. Now, this is something which is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, here we are also going to explore some of the basics regarding the Article 123 of the Constitution, that is the power to promulgate ordinance. Now, that becomes important for your prelims preparation this year as well. Now, trade, energy, and global conflict at the top of the agenda during Prime Minister's Norway visit. Now, Prime Minister has embarked on a visit to the North European nations, and you have had visit to Netherlands, you have had visit to Norway. So there you would have India Nordic Summit as well. So we are going to take these two articles together, relevant for your GS paper 2. We are going to talk about the Arctic Council also, the basics of what is Arctic Council, the areas of cooperation between India and these Nordic nations in the changing geopolitical order, in terms of technology, in terms of supply chain. We are going to have a comprehensive discussion beyond the articles as well. Then diversification gains. This is about the increase in the export and the overall exports that India has carried out in the month of April 2026. Now, what are the key positives here? That is the expansion of the non-petroleum exports. All those areas we are going to take a look into the positives as well as the challenges. We will basically have the crux of the entire article discussed in a couple of slides, relevant for your GS paper 3. U.S. China and the search for stability. This is an ongoing article piece, something that we have had a discussion on Friday as well, where we discussed the three T's, that is, trade, Trump, and Taiwan. Today, we will be discussing the case of three B's, that is, the beef, the Boeing, and the aspect of the Chinese trade, that is, the beans, soybeans. So, here, this is relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper 3. Then, rail-led industrial corridors likely game changer. This is an article talking about the dedicated freight corridor and overall the aspect of industrial corridors. So here we will take this opportunity to understand what are industrial corridors, what are the dedicated freight corridors, their overall importance and relevance, and how that can provide an economic boost. Very much relevant for your GS paper 1 as well as for your GS paper 3. Now, some of the articles which have been appearing relevant for your prelims examination, you have the Panzath Nag, the region of Kazigand in Anantnag. Now, this has been mentioned. Now, there is a festival, the Spring Festival, which is celebrated, its relevance, and overall the historical aspect. Chola era inscriptions, what are also known as the Leiden inscriptions, which have been handed over to India after around 2 centuries. So, basically, what are those? And that has called for other inscriptions to be brought back and repatriated back to India as well. So, what is the relevance of this Chola era inscriptions and the other inscription which has been mentioned in the article relevant for your prelims? Europe and China, they have together launched the Smile mission. What is this Smile mission about? So that is something we are going to talk about along with the case of the magnetosphere. So these are the portions that we are going to be discussing today. Now, before we start with the discussion of the first article, an announcement for all of you. Now, as the prelims is approaching and is going to be held this weekend, it is important for you to revise the existing concepts. Now, oftentimes, reading the same content again and again doesn't do much good. So, that is why what we have come up with, for example, in the case of geography as well as environment and ecology, are a series of lectures which will help you revise. For example, today, that is 18th of May, we will have a special session on the platform at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. on the app, covering the global areas in news, the places in news, including the region of West Asia, which is in conflict. So that will be a kind of a revision, right? Then, 19th of May, that is tomorrow at 6 p.m., we are going to have a discussion on YouTube. On the same channel, you will find a discussion about geography through important MCQs. The questions associated with climatology, the rare earth elements, Indian geography, physical geography, right? So, geography through MCQs, it will be a brief session of around 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes. And we are going to target some of the important concepts through these MCQs. Then on 21st of May, again at 5 p.m., we are basically going to have a revision session on the app again for the protected areas, that is species and wildlife sanctuaries in news and national parks in news. Okay, the link of all of these you will find in the description below. Do utilize these sessions and do ensure a timely revision is done. We will catch you tomorrow on the YouTube at 6 p.m. live, and on the app at 5 p.m. today, and on 21st May again at 5 p.m. Now, having said that, let us start with the discussion of the first topic, that is Ordinance increases number of Supreme Court judges to 37. Now, the president has given the assent to an ordinance which has to increase, or which will increase, the number of Supreme Court judges. Now, this comes in the wake of growing uh, pendency of cases in the Supreme Court, as well as the overall judicial pendency in our country has been rising at a very, very alarming rate. Now, it is a kind of a old adage, that is, justice delayed is justice denied here. Many of the court cases in our country, they keep on being pushed, and the pending cases have risen to almost 93,000 in Supreme Court alone. The number is about to reach six figures very soon, given that the Supreme Court is going into the case of the summer bench, right? So there is going to be the summer recess, during which the pendency of cases generally tends to increase. So, in the midst of all this, there has been a kind of a growing clamor call that we should increase the number of judges in all the courts, High Court, the district courts, as well as the Supreme Court. Right. So, first of all, let us understand the context of this article. So, the context is that the Supreme Court Amendment Ordinance 2026 has been promulgated in accordance with the powers of the President under Article 123 of the Constitution. What the ordinance has sought to do is it has amended the Section 2 of the Supreme Court Number of Judges Act 1956 to replace the word 33 with 37. Mind you, this 37 is other than the Chief Justice. So if you include the Chief Justice, then the total number of judges will be 38. Now, here, the number of judges in the Supreme Court initially was not at this large number. We will take a look at the historical increases which have happened. But prior to that, important for your prelims as well as the mains examination is the Article 123 of the Constitution. Article 123, which lies in the Part 5 of the Indian Constitution, provides the President with an extraordinary ordinance making powers. Now, what are these powers? So basically, when we talk about the ordinance issuing power, at any point of time, when the parliament is not in session, except when both the houses of parliament are in session. So, ordinance cannot be passed during the time when the parliament is in session. So, other than that, at any point of time, when the president is satisfied that the circumstances do exist which renders it necessary for him or her to take immediate action, he or she may promulgate such ordinances as the circumstances appear to require. Now, an ordinance promulgated under this shall have the same force and effect as an act passed by the Parliament. Okay? But every such ordinance shall be laid before both the houses of the parliaments as soon as they convene. The ordinance have to be laid in front of the parliament and shall cease to operate at the expiration of 6 weeks from the reassembly of the parliament. Okay, it might also be the case that both the houses of the parliament do not convene at the same time. So, in that case, the 6 weeks from the house which has been convened later on. If before the expiration of that period, resolutions disapproving it are passed by both the houses of the parliament, then the ordinance ceases to be in force. Or if, let's suppose, it may be withdrawn at any point of time by the president also. So, in these cases, the ordinance ceases to be in existence. Now, the ordinance is considered to be void, right, if any ordinance under this article makes a provision which the parliament would not, under the constitution, be competent to act. What does that mean? Let's suppose a parliament is not competent to make a law on any of the state subjects. Let's suppose there is an ordinance which is passed into that effect. Now, Parliament is not competent to make such laws, so such kind of ordinances shall automatically be considered void. So, this is the nuance associated with Article 123. In a brief gist, what is it that you have to retain for Article 123? Passed by the President under extraordinary circumstances when the houses are not in session, right? If the houses are in session, the issue has to be raised on the floor of the Parliament. Now, the ordinance will cease to exist from 6 weeks from the convening of the parliament. If the houses convene at different dates, then the 6 weeks from the convening of the later house, whichever house has been convened later on. Or the ordinance will cease to exist if a resolution is passed against that. Or the ordinance will cease to exist if it is withdrawn by the president. Or in other cases, the ordinance shall be void if it creates a particular law of it, or it seems to pass a particular law in which the parliament is not competent to pass that. So that is the case of the ordinance making power under part 5 of the constitution. Now, having said that, if you take a look at the number of judges, now the number of judges in the Supreme Court, that is present in the section 2 of which article? The Supreme Court Number of Judges Act 1956. Now, this Supreme Court Number of Judges Act 1956 has been amended significant number of times in the past to increase the number of judges, right? The framers of the constitution had, so the number of judges which are mentioned under article 124, if you recall, from article 124 all the way till around 143, you have the dealing with the Supreme Court. So article 124, that envisaged the Supreme Court consisting of the Chief Justice and not more than 7 judges, unless and until the Parliament passes a law. Now, that law was passed in 1950, 1956, 60, 77, 86, 2009, 2019, and now 2026. So, it has been amended multiple number of times in the past. Now, what is the purpose or the importance of this? That is something we have to understand in detail. So, when we talk about the importance of the increased strength, first of all, is judicial pendency. Judicial pendency is at a record level. And if we take a look at the present rate of disposal of cases, the number of pending cases are getting piled up or getting added on. So, this is exaggerating the problem. This is already increasing the problem that we are facing. Now, it is the famous case of justice delayed is justice denied. Also, you have to understand, with limited number of judges, you also face the issue where multiple different cases associated with certain areas of expertise, they are not handled with that much alacrity or that much care. So when you increase the number of judges, you can have dedicated number of judges for, let's suppose, finance related issues, or let's suppose some of the environmental related issues, some of the criminal related issues, some of the constitutional issues, and so on. What we are seeing in the present day cases are that because of the increased pendency of cases, you have many of the important judgments, many of the important cases, for example, associated with the constitutional amendment, etc., which should have been disposed of immediately, they lie pending, and the larger constitutional question that goes in the back burner for a longer period of time. Supreme Court starts becoming unapproachable, where if you have enough amount of contact, if you have enough amount of, let's suppose, people backing you, people in power are involved, then the cases are disposed of very quickly, and for the common citizenry, Supreme Court tends to remain out of bounds. But this judicial pendency, along with this, you also have to talk about the importance of importance of specialized benches. With limited number of judges, specialized benches will also be limited. Okay, larger constitutional questions oftentimes are kept in abeyance. But this is not the only solution. Supreme Court is at the top of the pyramid. The number of judges to the High Court, now, they are much more. There are a lot of vacancies which still lie around in the case of the high courts. But the problem where it all starts is at the district courts. Now, this is where majority of the issues or majority of the cases should be tackled at the base itself. Right. So here also the pendency is very high, and that is where the pendency keeps on increasing. Many of them are then raised to the High Court, many of them then raised to the Supreme Court. Many of the cases have been lying around for decades now. Now, that is why we need to start filling up the vacancies at these levels. This is where some of the innovative solutions, which multiple different parliamentary panels have also talked about, for example, creation of all India judicial services, they need to be talked about in all seriousness. Because these pendency of cases has also led to weaker enforcement of the laws. Whenever you have, let's suppose, and this leads to a socio-cultural and a socio-economic issue as well. How? Understand this. Okay, this is an important aspect that you would have dealt around in your social or in your society as well. Earlier, there you always used to be the case that, let's suppose, there is an injustice which is done. Now people would rely on the police force, the police system, and the judiciary, that the judiciary will do justice. But if now the perception which has been built is that if you take it to the court will drag it on for multiple years and decades altogether. The society gets a framework or a mental map of instant justice. That leads to mob violence. And you have the cases of multiple different types of lynchings which are done, suspected witchcraft, suspected conversion cases. You have the mob justice which is done, which is, in fact, the lack of justice and the lack of rule of law. So, all of this can be rooted to the case of the judicial pendency. Now, there are other issues, obviously, of law enforcement, etc. It is not the only reason why you have that mob violence. But one of the major reasons is that people start losing trust in the entire judicial process. You cannot have a well functioning, vibrant, and healthy democratic system with a kind of a lacunae in this region. That is why important to fill these and to carry out the judicial reforms. Judicial reforms are the next big set of reforms required in our country. Think about even in economic parameters. You talk about and you hear about the term ease of doing business. Various different issues are involved in ease of doing business. But then, one of the areas where India performs very poorly year after year is the contractual enforcement. That once a contract has been agreed upon and reached by the parties, thereafter also it is not enforced. There is judicial pendency of the cases, and there are economic losses due to which investors are wary to invest in various different areas. So there is an economic cost to be borne as well. There's a societal cost to be borne as well. And obviously, there is a political cost. So, political cost in terms of the larger constitutional questions that keep on getting pushed back for a longer period of time. Then the social issue we have discussed, and also we have the case of the economic issue. Okay, so all these three you have to write when you talk about the reforms or the need for reforms in the judicial system. Okay, now before we move on to the next article, an important announcement for all of you willing to prepare for civil services. You have the opportunity and you have the time now to prepare for the next year's examination. Be a part of some of the best educators in the country on the platform and avail the lucrative price for a duration of 12 months. Use the code IAS English and get the discount. You will get the complete coverage of GS, whatever is the requirement of the syllabus, nothing more, nothing less, along with CSAT, along with the test series. Ideal course for the preparation, what is required for you. So start the preparation from today itself. Now, the Prime Minister has embarked on a visit to the Northern European nations. Netherlands, Norway, Sweden are some of the countries where the Prime Minister has visited. Now, this marks a very important milestone for India. If you are following the geopolitics of today's turbulent times, this is a very interesting turn that India has been taking. Now, you know the background of it, that presently the world, ever since the Russia Ukraine war, has been thrown into an uncertainty, a chaos where no one knows what tomorrow is going to bring, to add on to the Iran conflict and to add on to the case of US, the belligerent China. Now, the Trumpian US is as unpredictable as China, and that has basically disillusioned European nations as well. That has basically put India's growth story in doldrums, and that is why the northern European nations and India, they seek to partner each other. With Netherlands, for example, there have been various different MOUs regarding technology. Mind you, Netherlands is one of those countries which is a net technology exporter for various different aspects, for various different technological aspects. For example, even in semiconductor technology, there also Netherlands has expertise which India can utilize. Netherlands has also said that it can help Indian Navy to protect its submarine assets. So there is a lot to gain for India from these particular nations. We will talk about the Nordic countries, we will talk about the Arctic Council, and all those importances also. But here, this visit is being held after a long time of 4 years. This visit was supposed to be held, or this India Nordic summit, which is being held after 4 years, this was supposed to be held last year. But in the wake of the Pahalgam attack and the Operation Sindoor, that was postponed. Now, the world is more tumultuous as compared to last year. So that is why we need to understand this. And as aspirants of civil services, this is also important for you. So, first of all, let us take, so we will combine both the articles. One, trade, energy, and global conflict at top of agenda during Prime Minister's Norway visit, and Oslo summit must mark India's northward turn. Both of them we will consider together. Now, when we say Nordic countries, which are the Nordic countries, the important Nordic countries? So these are the five important Nordic countries: the Scandinavian nations, that is Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland. These are your Nordic countries. These are the regions which are rich in energy resources. For example, you have oil in the region of North Sea, gas. Now you have had the first large shipment of the LNG, which was done to India, and a 15-year deal with Norwegian energy major Equinor has led to the LNG shipment. Now, LNG is something which an energy starved nation like India desperately requires. Now, India Nordic Summit has been held twice previously. First summit was held in 2018 in Stockholm, in Sweden, and it inaugurated the summit level engagement. What do we mean by summit level? What is the difference between a summit and a conference? Whenever you hear about the term summit, it will always involve the heads of the state. Okay, the top levels of the state or the nation, they will be involved in conversation. That is the importance of summit. Okay, established a mutual commitment to leverage Nordic technological strength with India's scale and market. Then the second Nordic summit in 2022, right, was held in Copenhagen, Denmark, and addressed post pandemic economic recovery, climate change, green and clean growth, and so on. Now, after this, the Russia Ukraine war broke out, the Iran US war broke out, and you have the tariff tantrums by the US. The rise of China has become much more apparent now. What Trump has cited as G2, that is, the two powerful nations of the world. So, this has created new geopolitical challenges. That is why this particular Nordic summit, which is to be held or which has been held in Oslo, that becomes of utmost importance. Here, India's role and the editorial piece talks about India's role in the Arctic Council as well. Now, what is the Arctic Council? The countries around the region of the Arctic, right? Now, Arctic is an important area in the changing geopolitical order. Now, the Arctic Council in itself was established in 1996 by the Ottawa Declaration that established the Arctic Council, right? Cooperation, coordination, and interaction between the Arctic states. What is relevant for your prelims are the members of the Arctic Council. So, the region around the Arctic, consider all the region around the Arctic, whichever are the countries, they are the members of the Arctic Council. So, you basically have Canada, Denmark, obviously Greenland is there in the region of Arctic under the suzerainty of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russian Federation, Sweden, and the US. Other than that, the Faroe Islands and Greenland and the islands of Åland are also included in the council via Denmark and Finland. Now, if you take a look at all these countries, other than Russia, almost all of them are NATO members. So that makes the council quite unique and slightly dysfunctional as well, because there is a kind of an antipathy to Russian involvement as well. Now, here, once you take a look at the Arctic Council, India is not a member, India is an observer. India has got a lot of stake in the region of the Arctic. And Nordic countries forming a key DNA of the Arctic Council, the involvement becomes much more important. So, what are the areas of cooperation? That is something you should know in just point-wise manner. Let us understand them. First of all, one of the prime area of cooperation is the energy sector. When we take a look at the energy sector, both conventional and non-conventional forms of energy, that is where India can benefit. For example, when we talk about the conventional forms of energy, regions like Norway, now there you have substantial amount of oil and gas in the region, which has brought about prosperity in the region as well. So that is where India seeks to benefit bilaterally as the larger group. And mind you, the Indo-Nordic meetings, the summit level meetings, have been very instrumental in signing off the Indian European Free Trade Agreement, the EFTA. Now, in the present day age where the typical conventional energy supply through the Gulf of Hormuz is being threatened, these other sources of energy have to be utilized by India. But also non conventional forms of energy. What do we mean by non conventional forms of energy? For example, when we talk about geothermal energy, that is the energy which is being exploited due to the heat from the interior of the earth. India has also got substantial amount of geothermal energy potential. In case you are aware, India already has got geothermal energy power plants in two places. One is in the region of Manikaran, in the region of Himachal Pradesh, and also the Puga Valley in the region of Ladakh. In these two areas, India has set up its base for geothermal energy extraction. Now, in the region of the Arctic, the Nordic countries, the Nordic Council, and the Arctic Council, you have the expertise by Iceland. Iceland is at the global front when it comes to the geothermal energy technology. Because if you take a look at the location of Iceland here, if I can show it to you on the map again, this region of Iceland that lies bang on the middle of a mid Atlantic ridge. This is your mid Atlantic ridge. So from here, lot of heat is being produced from the interior of the earth. The ocean is expanding underneath. That is why Iceland is the region which experiences huge amount of volcanic eruptions as well. So Iceland has have an expertise in extracting that heat energy, converting the water into steam, and thereby being able to produce energy. It is a clean form of energy. You have that much amount of energy present in the Himalayan region of our country. Not because there is volcanism in the Himalayan region, but the compression of rocks are so high in the Himalayan region that you have sufficient amount of heat which is generated due to the compressional force of the rocks. Now, that heat, the compressional force of the rocks, that heat is enough to convert the groundwater into steam, provided the groundwater has got atmospheric exposure. So, that is where India has got a lot to extract technologically. But other than that, the changing geopolitics, the geopolitical scenario of the world we have talked about is changing. The European nations, which always considered US as an ally across the lake being the Atlantic Ocean, now they have started growing wary of the intentions of US. And they have started doubting the long term intentions of US, not only restricted to Trump. After all, Trump has basically uh, given them as bluntly as possible that take care of your own economy, take care of your own defense. And that is where they want to diversify and hedge their bets to other developing regions of the world. And India, being the largest population of the world, seeks to gain from that. Now, here you also have the case of the climate change. For example, the melting of the Arctic. Now, melting of Arctic has got multiple different implications. First of all, there is a sea level rise. India has got a long coastline of more than 11,000 kilometers. Sea level rise can substantially influence India's overall economy and social structure across the coastal regions. So, melting Arctic is leading to sea level rise. Study of that becomes important for India. India already has got the Arctic Observatory in the region of Svalbard in the northern part of Norway, island of Svalbard. Other than that, you also have the region of melting of the Barents Sea. Barents Sea. Now, this Barents Sea, if it does not freeze, it has got a direct impact on the rainfall variability caused due to the monsoon. So, Indian monsoon is impacted because of this. So that is why study of that and cooperation in that becomes important. We have had scientific observatories there, but we need to further expand on that research. So this scientific research becomes important. Now, then, when it comes to technology, we have talked about the role of technology. It is also a market, by the way. These regions in the Nordic and the Arctic region, they are a market. You have almost 1,500 companies from the region investing in India, but only half of the number is of Indian companies are investing there. So there's a lot of scope for expansion of bilateral trade and also to explore the avenue of multilateralism. So India tends to gain substantially out of it. Supply chains. Now, we all talk about critical minerals, rare earth elements, and how China has had a stranglehold about of the supply of critical minerals here. Greenland and the region of the Nordic nations, they are again a rich source of critical minerals. Now, that is one of the reasons why Mr. Trump was interested in annexing Greenland. Now, by increasing the trade, We are not an expansionist power. We seek cooperation. We seek bilateralism and multilateralism. So, thereby, we can hedge the bets and diversify the supply chains when it comes to critical minerals and fuel India's growth story. Mind you, here you should also include the country of Netherlands, which is not a part of the Nordic nations or the country or the Arctic Council, but Netherlands is equally important when it comes to the growth of semiconductor technology in India, when it comes to the development of submarine cabling technology in India. Netherlands is an important key partner. Then comes maritime trade. Maritime trade is also associated with the melting of the Arctic. Now, melting of the Arctic, what it has brought about is expansion of newer polar routes. You have the northern trade route, which is being explored by Russia. If you believe the scientific findings by IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, it predicts by 2040 we are going to experience a completely ice-free region of Arctic during at least one summer. So that means that opens up a shorter trade route to the region of Europe, which will be away from, or which will be far away from, the conflict zones of West Asia. So that needs to be explored by India. China is already expanding upon it, and the Chinese Russian cooperation allows for a further growth into the region. But there are certain challenges that India faces in these areas of cooperation. What are the challenges? First of all, the belligerent China. China has already been expanding its footprints in the region, and China has also declared the region of trade route as a polar silk route. Polar Silk Route. Right. Now, with the help of the Polar Silk Route and the expansion of the Chinese maritime ambitions, that is where you have the global supply chains which are impacted, which can be impacted and which can be controlled only by China. So we need to go there. And Russia is being seen as an outlier in the Arctic Council. Now, that is where we can actually use this challenge of the Arctic Council to our advantage. We are having a kind of a good relation with Russia. Now, you already have the Chennai Vladivostok corridor. Now, that Chennai Vladivostok corridor, the Chennai Vladivostok corridor, right? Vladivostok corridor can be expanded, first of all, to the region of Kola Peninsula. Kola Peninsula is where, if you can take a look at the background image, this is where you have the Kola Peninsula in this region of the world. Okay, so here it can be expanded to the port of Murmansk, first of all, in the region of Kola Peninsula. That is where you have the White Sea, and then further to the region of Norway. So, if this expansion tends to happen, it can provide a developmental corridor in the region and will provide a kind of a maritime trade traffic for India as well, which perfectly aligns with the shipping aim and the rise of the shipping industry that India is aiming for. But one of the challenges that we face is the case of the lack of shipping tech in India. Now, shipping technology, when it comes to shipping technology in India, we are not one of the front runners. China, Korea, etc., they dominate the shipping tech. That is why not only do we need to have enough carrier containers which are made in India, which can traverse the global routes, but we also need to have specific ice condition or the ice fleet which can navigate through the icy waters of the Arctic. And that needs to be done as soon as possible. Otherwise, we can be left behind in the race. Right? There are multiple areas of cooperation, including the people to people connect. After all, the Himalayas are considered to be the third pole. So, the people in the region of the Himalayas to the people in the Nordic regions, we can have a cultural connect as well that India's Arctic policy talks about. So, that is where you have the areas of challenges, areas of cooperation, and the other regions where we can improve. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the practice question. First of all, discuss the role of Nordic countries in India's global geopolitics. Now, here, what does your intro talk about? How do you frame your introduction? Your intro in this case has to talk about the case of the Nordic countries. What do you mean by the Nordic nations? So, the group of five nations, including the islands of Faroe, the islands of Åland, all of these. So, basically, that is the Nordic nations. Now, that will be your intro. Then, in the body portion, talk about role of India or role of them in India's development. So, there you talk about energy, the case of technology, climate change, all the factors that we have talked about. Then, in the later part of the body, talk about the Indo Nordic Council, Nordic Summit, right? The summits which have been held, right? You talk about the third summit also, you include it within it. Then, in the conclusion, how do you frame the conclusion? The changing geopolitical order asks for a change in the global alignment and diversifying your resources and basically diversifying the areas of trade is the way to go. And that is how you can conclude. Okay. Now, the next article about diversification gains. Now, April 2026 did see an increase in India's trade sector. Our overall exports have increased, right? And that is because of the exploration of newer trade markets. You have had newer trade markets, for example, for handlooms, for our merchandise exports, all of that has seen a diversification of the trade markets. At the same time, there are certain challenges in West Asia, etc. So the share of exports to West Asia have declined in double digits. But one thing that is a key positive is that despite the geopolitical turbulence that we are experiencing, India's exports have been rising. That is what was the fear since last year of the Trump tariffs, that India's export sector might experience a decline. But that is something, thankfully, which we are not experiencing. So there are areas of concern, but there are areas of positive aspect as well. So let us take a look at each one of them one by one so that you can compile it for your examination. So exports grew by around 14% despite the global disruptions. And this is on the in the midst of exploration and expansion of market. What does that mean, expansion of market? Let's suppose earlier the exporters were sending Indian goods to 5 different countries. Now they have started sending goods to 10 different countries. That is the expansion of market. Over a period of time, you can send more goods to these countries, increasing the trade volume and the trade value as well. So, according to government data, at least 20 exporting sectors have added 17 or more new destinations in the last year. For example, the handloom exports, which is a labor intensive industry in our country, which also generates a lot of jobs at the low end skill level. Now, there the handloom products are now exported to 29 more countries in 24-25 than as compared to 24-25. So handloom exports have grown. Now, one of the fear had been that look, petroleum prices are increasing. Now, India does export some of the refined oil, right? The crude it refines at various facilities and then it tends to export. So, the idea was that look, petroleum prices are increasing, so the value of your exports automatically will increase because the refined oil becomes costlier. But here, the good news has been the growth in non petroleum export areas. That is the good news. For example, in engineering goods, electronic goods, drugs and pharmaceuticals, organic and inorganic chemicals. In these sectors, the growth has been 9%, non petroleum growth, non petroleum sector growth. And merchandise export, a growth of 9.9%. So, more than the growth in import. So, these are some of the good news. But there are certain challenges also which the article indicates. What are the challenges? First of all, due to the turbulence in West Asia, the exports to the region have fell by around 28%. Now, as long as the conflict continues, this will continue to take a hit and that will impact India's economy. Imports of safe haven asset gold that increased by 82%. 82% only in the month of April. Now, that has increased our deficit, that has increased our overall import bill. Perhaps one of the reasons why the Prime Minister gave a clarion call to avoid buying gold in the near time future because of the huge amount of import bill that we are generating out of it. Now, share of services exports have become more important. In 2014, in our overall export basket, the share of services was around 39%. That has increased to 49%. Now, while it is a positive news as well, but it is a kind of an area of concern as well. Why? Because these services are mostly IT driven. Now, IT is facing one of the biggest interruptions or disruptions in the past few decades. That is the inroads made by AI, artificial intelligence. Now, this artificial intelligence, if you are not at the forefront of this artificial intelligence, you will be left behind. You will become redundant. That is why it is important for our country to diversify the non services exports, but also at the same time increase the use of AI to make this relevant and to ensure we are one of the net providers and suppliers of AI rather than the importers of AI. So these are the positives and the challenges that can be extracted from this brief news story about the exports. Now, then the follow on story, that is the US China and the search for stability. Now, Trump, in his visit to China, was clearly impressed by the Chinese power. And Trump is a person, you can easily read his mind. And he was in awe of the Chinese power, the Chinese the entire power structure, the military parades that were conducted, and so on. And this basically marked a kind of a timid moment in Trump's entire presidency, where he has been quite aggressive towards China till now. Mind you, it was only last year where, for the first time, Trump threatened to impose sanctions and large tariffs on China. Now, how China responded was also exemplary. China imposed restrictions on the import of the three Bs, that is, the soybeans, beans, beef, as well as the case of Boeing. Now, China has not been importing aircrafts or Boeing aircraft from from US since 2017. Now, aircraft industry is a large economic sector in US. At the same time, there was an increasing concern. There is an increased concern in US, which is heading to midterm elections later this year, because the energy prices are increasing in US, which is leading to inflation. At the same time, there is a crisis in the farm sector. Now that typically addresses the loyal MAGA belt, right, or the Trump electorate. And that is why Trump sought to assuage the kind of difficult situation that both the countries find themselves in. Now, after the threatening of the tariffs, increase in the tariffs, the kind of sanctions imposed by China, for example, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he was basically sanctioned by China to a certain extent. Now, the truce was agreed upon in the APEC summit, which was held in Busan, South Korea, last year. Now, there was a 1 year truce which was declared. So, this summit meeting, which was held, it did not have enough tangibles. More of a kind of an aesthetic value was associated, but it paved the way for future conversations, energy security being one of them. Now, here, the US and the three Bs, which are important for the US, first of all. So, first is the case of the beans, soybeans. Mind you, China has one of the largest poultry sector in the world. And when it comes to the pigs, right, they feed on soybeans or soy meal. And that is being imported from US. Now, in the face of the Trump tariff tantrums, China diversified its market to Argentina and other countries, and that basically impacted the US farmers. So, this is the case of the beans. Then, the other is the case of the beef. Large number of beef plants in US, they are facing difficulty in operating because their export market, which was China, had shut down the imports or had closed down the imports. And the third B would be Boeing, that is the aircraft supply. So, China has agreed upon, as a result of this meeting, to take in 200 more airplanes and multiple hundreds of aircraft engines from US, which the US is triumphant about and is happy about. So that is something that US is extracting out of it. Now, at the same time, you have the role of tech, trade, Trump, and also the silent T, that is Taiwan. Now, Trump made a statement in the interview issued thereafter that US has no interest in interfering in a region 9,500 miles away from the US shores. Seems he has not measured the distance between US and Iran. It would be much greater than that, but nonetheless, he says that because Taiwan is far away, we should not interfere in that. So US has taken a backseat as per its national security doctrine as well. And this summit was very unique because for the first time, the Secretary of War, or in generic terms, the Secretary of Defense, was also included in the US delegation. Pete Hegseth, one of the most belligerent US voices, was made a part in order to signal peacemaking between US and China. China, for its part, is seeking greater access to US tech. Okay? Now, US wants China to import its GPUs. That is why Nvidia chief was included in that group of CEOs who visited. Now, China is seeking to develop its own GPUs, but nonetheless, US wants China to take, or China rather, also is interested in taking Nvidia's GPUs, right? H200 being one of them. So that is where both of them are seeking a middle path. US is seeking opening up of the market, Chinese market, for agro imports, for and the agro exports of US, and overall seeking to lower the energy prices. Energy prices have been skyrocketing. Energy prices. Now, US knows that without Chinese intervention, the war at Iran won't come to a closure. That is why US is seeking Chinese help. And what China has done, China has promised Trump, we will import more energy from you, because mind you, US overall is a net energy surplus nation. It is not an energy import dependent nation like India or China. It is an energy surplus nation. So that is where it also seeks to create some amount of more trade balance between US and China. US and China trade is running into deficit, with obviously Chinese having a kind of a trade surplus, which is the trait almost in every part of the world. So this is the outcome. Taiwan has been the silent factor, and one of the key aspects of the theatrics that the Chinese hosted was it timed the summit with the visit of the Taiwanese leader of opposition who is pro China around that time itself, which further cemented the kind of Taiwanese unification with China. And that basically put the US voice on a back foot. Now, US and Taiwan, they have a deal for interoperability, but nonetheless, US clearly is taking a back foot and signaling a strategic shift away. Okay. Now, this is where multiple announcements which have been made are only talking about the aesthetics. The real deal about what happened in the negotiations maybe will come out in the next few days. So that is where let's see how the story develops. But this is the development till now, which we discussed on Friday as well, which we discussed today as well, and we will be discussing furthermore. Now, coming to the next story, rail led industrial corridors likely game changer. Now, after a long period of time, the dedicated freight corridors, the eastern and the western dedicated freight corridors, are nearing completion. And this is a vital moment in the economic growth of our country. This was one of the silent progresses that India has made, and it is a long drawn success story. It was Dr. Manmohan Singh's government who basically initiated a plan regarding the dedicated freight corridors. Because you have to understand that when we talk about freight transfer means that goods transfer from point A to point B. In our country, the freight trains, they travel at a laggard pace, average pace of around 25 to 40 kilometer per hour. That's it. So that is why railway freight takes a very long period of time to move from one region to another. Now, as a consequence of that, the transporters, they have basically moved on into more reliable, that is the road transport. Now, road transport is again overladen because we have not expanded the network of national highways, the expansion of national highways to such an extent. And road transport is not also eco-friendly. There is a lot of pollution which is created, wear and tear which is created, traffic jams which are created. Now, what has happened is that with the development of the dedicated freight corridor, which was initially sanctioned under Dr. Manmohan Singh, but the land acquisition was an issue, the real work about it started somewhere around 2016. After that, it has now been completed by after almost a decade. Now, what it has done is it has created separate lines of movement only for the freight trains, where the freight trains are expected to run at a speed of around 100 kilometer per hour, thereby instituting a timely delivery of the consignments, reducing the logistics cost, and thereby providing a boost to the economic growth. We will explore that further. We also have to understand that rail traffic is one of the most eco friendly as well as one of the most uh, price efficient sectors of or avenues of travel. When we have the rail traffic, you have to understand that this rail traffic transports good at a rate of 1.96 per ton, rupee 1.96 per ton per kilometer, which is one of the cheapest, other than obviously the waterway transport, which is cheaper than that. This is one of the cheapest way to transfer your goods, transfer the various different materials. India has also developed very large freight trains. For example, India has instituted the longest train in the country. Which is the longest train in the country? You have the case of Rudrastra. The length is a whopping 4.5 kilometer, right? 4.5-kilometer train hauled by 7 locomotives carrying more than 370 container bogies that has already completed the trial run. So think about the amount of logistics which can be transferred. Then you have other such train, that is Super Vasuki. Super Vasuki is another train with a length of 3.5 kilometers. Now, this is something which was unheard of, let's suppose, in the distant past. But now this is a reality which can be utilized. Now, the article talks about establishment of such industrial corridors across the country, which can bolster the economic growth. Now, when we say industrial corridors, what are industrial corridors and which are the important industrial corridors? So, industrial corridors, they offer integration between the industrial regions because majorly what you experience is the growth is concentrated only in the industrial zones of the country, be it the Delhi, Meerut, Ghaziabad region, or the area of Mumbai, Pune industrial belt, or Bangalore, Chennai industrial zone, or the Vishakhapatnam industrial zone, or the kind of Hooghly industrial zone. Growth is concentrated only in these areas. What about the intervening regions? If you want the development of the country, you need to have the development of the entire connecting region as well. For that, you need the efficient transportation, rail led transportation if possible. And that is the industrial corridor, which will include warehousing, which will include the various aspects of, let's suppose, the townships, the power sector. So, high speed transportation network, rail and road, ports with state of the art cargo handling equipment, modern airports. That is where you have the PM Gati Shakti talking about and the development of the entire transportation hubs, special economic regions or industrial areas, logistic parks, more warehouses have come into existence. With the completion of this, the year experienced a 29% increase in warehousing demand as compared to last year. Now, that is efficient. Complementary infrastructure such as township and other enabling policy. So these are your various industrial corridors across the country. You will have the Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the red one, then the eastern one, that is the case of the all the way from Ludhiana, Amritsar to the region of Dankuni, right? Now it has not been completed till the region of Kolkata, somewhere in the region of Jharkhand. It is lying there. But there are other such industrial corridors also, which are in the midst of development. And that is where these industrial corridors and their growth lies with the freight corridors. Freight corridors become a very important part. And mind you, when the freight corridors basically become operational across the country, it will do a world of good to the other railway network also, because the railway network right now is overcrowded with the passenger and the freight trains. If the freight trains are moving separately, the passenger trains also will have a higher average speed, and also the wear and tear of the passenger railway lines will be lesser. So as a consequence, there will be economic positivity and the benefit of rail travel for the larger population also. Why is it important? Improved and efficient logistics, because mind you, we talked about the case that the rail traffic is and the rail transportation is very efficient. Warehousing hubs away from the major cities. Now please understand how it will be cost effective. Let's suppose you are developing, or you are a small time producer, let's suppose in one of the regions in Rajasthan. Now, till now, let's suppose you are a producer in Rajasthan, or even in, let's suppose, Haryana. Now, till now, you would have had to utilize the warehousing hub in the region of Faridabad or in the region of Delhi NCR. Now, that will be costly. Renting that will be costly. But what if a warehousing hub gets established near your location in Bhiwadi or in Dadri? Now, in that particular case, the rent cost will reduce, isn't it? Rent cost will reduce, more freight trains, transportation cost will reduce. So, overall, the price of your goods, the goods price will tend to reduce. When the goods price reduces, it makes your goods more competitive, not only in the domestic market, but also in the international market. Because, mind you, for example, when we talk about the Western dedicated freight corridor, that Western dedicated freight corridor extends from Dadri all the way to JNPT. Dadri in the region around Noida to the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust. So that is the case of the entire transportation grid which will be established. Okay. So that is why it will be beneficial, it will be cost effective, right? Developmental spread, which is now concentrated only in certain areas, leading to population density being very high in these urban areas. Urban areas are facing overpopulation and increased stress. So that development will be well distributed, and it will lead to a kind of a uniform growth. So that is why there are a lot of benefits which can be extracted out of it. Which day news it is? It is today's news. It is basically present in the international edition of the Hindu newspaper. Now, the practice question: discuss the importance of dedicated freight corridors in India in terms of the economic growth. So, here, first of all, in the intro, what are dedicated freight corridors? Right? DFCs, typically for the transportation of the freight. That is where the DFCs are involved. Okay, and in the body, their role. What about we have discussed about the importance, code the logistics cost price, the efficiency, competitiveness in the export market, distribution of development, reduction of pressure in the urban environment. All these you have to discuss. That is in the body portion. Okay, and the conclusion: we need more such areas to be developed with the faster means of communication. Now, then some of the topics in brief relevant for your prelims. Fish by the basket. Now, a unique spring festival was being observed in the region of Kulgam, that is in the area of Panzath Nag, in the larger area of Kulgam in Kashmir. Now, Panzath Nag is a region of springs. It stands for 500 springs. Right. 500 springs. Fresh water, obviously. That is what the immediate meaning is. Now, in this festival, Spring Festival, what is generally done is that with wicker baskets, people enter into these ponds in the month of May and they take out the fish, the excess mud, weed, etc. in order to ensure the flow of water in these springs, which will be helpful even during the next season. Next season is where many of the areas they grow paddy, and that is where the supply of water becomes vitally important. So that is why this Panzath Nag region experiences this unique spring festival. Okay, so it cleans the spring as well. It creates a fisheries catch as well. Now, the historical aspect of it, it is one of those which finds its mention in Raj Tarangini. Okay, the historical work describing or discussing the region of Kashmir, Raj Tarangini, wrote by Kalhana. So that is where you have the description of the region of the Panzath Nag and also the case of the importance of this cleaning festival in the month of spring. Okay. Now, return of Chola era copper plates should spark efforts for further repatriations. That is something that the Indian archaeologists have talked about. Now, you have the Leiden copper plates, which has been sent or which has been repatriated to India. These are your Leiden copper plates, and it is held basically by a kind of a string. Right. So that is the case of the ring which bears the royal insignia of the Chola dynasty. What is that royal insignia? That also is important for your prelims. So the Leiden, why are they known as the Leiden copper plates? After all, these are the Chola plates, the Chola era plates, because they have been held in the Leiden University for almost 2 centuries now. Now, this is one of the early known inscriptions of the Chola era, right? So, these are your copper plates, which are also known as the Anai Mangalam plates, right? That is the name, the Anai Mangalam plates. They are a set of 21 rare 11th century Chola dynasty artifacts, which have been inscribed in Tamil as well as Sanskrit, weighing about 30 kg and bound by a bronze ring. So this ring that you see, that is bronze. Okay. And they have the Chola royal seal, and they document what? The tax-free land grants for the Buddhist monastery in Nagapattinam. The land grant as well as the inscription talks about the assurance of 4,500 kalam, right, of paddy plus land, right, plus land, in order to ensure the vihara in the region functions vitally important. Now, these were taken from Tamil Nadu to Netherlands around 1700 AD by the Dutch missionary, that is Florentius Camper. And what is the origin? Grants were initially initiated by the Chola emperor, that is Rajaraja Chola I, and permanently issued as a royal charter under Rajendra Chola I. That is why it is very vital, almost more than 1,000 years old. And they prove the international diplomacy and the heft of the Cholan Empire because of their dealings and the diplomacy with Southeast Asia. Right? They contain two major sections, five plates in Sanskrit, and you have 16 plates in Tamil that delineate the village boundaries and the paddy yields located for the vihara, which are to be established. It was built by basically, you had the king of Java, that is Sri Mara Vijayatunga Varman of Java, in the name of his father, that is Sri Chudamani Varman, and that is why it was known as the Chulamani Varma Vihara, and they were strung together by the bronze, and that is where bronze ring which had the royal Chola seal. What was that seal? That becomes important again for your prelims. So included a tiger, which is the royal emblem of the Cholas, the two fish of the Pandyas, the bow of the Cheras, the two chamaras, the royal parasol, the lamps, and the swastika. The two fish and the bow, that basically signified the Cholas' victory over the Pandyas and the Cheras. That is why two fish of the Pandyas, the bow of the Cheras, all of them then followed by the lion, the tiger of the Cholas. So that was the royal insignia, which is present in the bronze ring. Other artifact which the archaeologists are basically asking the government to repatriate, one of them is the Velvikudi copper plates, which is one of the oldest copper plates having the Tamil inscriptions abroad, right? So are an important 8th century bilingual inscription from the Pandyan kingdom. They date back to around the 8th century, right? Now they document the restoration of the land grants, and that confirms the Pandyan genealogy, which is present in the British Museum in London. And inscription was issued by the Pandya king Jatila Parantaka, right, to restore the village of Velvikudi to a Brahmana. So this is again the Velvikudi copper plate. So the Velvikudi copper plate and the Anai Mangalam copper plate or the Leiden copper plate becomes important for your prelims. Now, Europe and China are about to embark on a scientific mission known as the SMILE project. Right? SMILE basically stands for the Solar, Wind, Magnetosphere, Ionosphere Link Explorer. This is a joint mission between Europe and China in order to understand the feature of the solar winds. Now, solar winds, which are basically expulsed by the sun, are large amount of charged particles. Now, these charged particles are deviated by Earth's magnetosphere. This is the entirety of Earth's magnetosphere. These solar winds travel at a speed of around millions of kilometers per hour, and they reach planet Earth in a matter of couple of days. Now, if they have a very high amount of energy, they basically can disrupt, slightest amount of it can disrupt the power grid, the satellite network, and so on. But mostly, they tend to interfere in the region of high magnetic density, that is in the higher latitude, and that is where they disrupt the ionosphere of planet Earth, and that causes the luminescent northern and the southern light, what we refer to as the auroras. So, how do they get deflected? And the behavior of the solar winds, that is what the SMILE project is about. Mind you, India has got its own mission, that is the Aditya L1 mission, which is also precisely witnessing and measuring that from the Lagrange point. So that is why the SMILE mission becomes important. But what is important more for your prelims examination is the role of solar winds when it comes to the planet Earth and its atmosphere. That brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been helpful and it has added to the content. Now, if you have liked the content, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Take the quiz from these particular topics, the MCQs, by going and following us on the Telegram group. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.